Welcome back to Grimverse History, where we uncover the strange and forgotten sides of history. Tonight, we'll explore 8 horrifying bedroom rules enforced by Henry VIII, rules that governed not war or politics, but intimacy itself. Inside Henry VIII's bedchamber, love was irrelevant. Obedience was survival. Kings are remembered for conquests, laws, and crowns. But what if the most terrifying thing about a king happened after the doors were locked? What if marriage to a monarch was not a privilege, but a calculated risk? History loves to call Henry VIII a romantic tyrant. 6 wives, grand gestures, lavish courtly love. But romance dies quickly when rules replace desire, because inside his bedchambers, nothing was private, nothing was gentle, and nothing happened without consequences. You push open a heavy oak door, reinforced with iron. The hinges groan like they know what they're guarding. The air inside smells of candle smoke, wool fabric, and cold stone. Tapestries hide the walls, but they cannot muffle the silence. Somewhere nearby, servants wait. They are always waiting. You are never alone here, even when you are expected to be. Before we go any further, settle in with me. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to Grimverse History, and turn on notifications so these forgotten stories can find you again. And for now, take a slow breath. Let the weight of your day loosen its grip. You're safe here, listening in the dark where history can no longer hurt you. Now, dim the lights. Lower the volume of the world outside your room. Feel the steady rhythm of your breathing. Let your thoughts slow and soften. It's England, early 16th century. The Tudor court glows with gold and paranoia. And behind these bedroom doors, 8 horrifying rules wait to be obeyed or paid for. Henry's private world was filled with fear, humiliation, and control. His bedchamber, which should have been a place of love, trust, and intimacy, was instead turned into a stage of political theatre where queens lived in constant terror. In the court of Henry VIII, marriage was not simply about companionship or desire, it was about survival. On a Tudor wedding night, the bed is not private furniture, it is evidence. The sheets are not fabric, they are documents waiting to be stamped. You are not standing in a bedroom meant for rest. You are standing in a place where power watches everything you do, even when the candles are dimmed. And the rules of his bedroom prove that intimacy with the king was one of the most dangerous duties a queen could face. Many think they know the story of Henry's bedroom life. Every moment was scrutinized, every act judged, and every failure recorded. For Henry's wives, the marriage bed was not a sanctuary, but a courtroom. The stakes were life and death. You can almost feel the weight of unseen eyes. You know that even silence can be used against you. Rule 1. The wedding night must be proved. In Tudor England, a royal marriage was not a private affair between 2 people. It was a state matter, one that carried the weight of dynastic succession and political alliances. The first night of a queen's marriage to Henry VIII was treated as a public trial. The consummation of the marriage had to be proven beyond any doubt. The evidence was as grotesque as it was humiliating. Sheets were carefully inspected for blood. They were examined as if they were crime scene evidence. Royal physicians would scrutinize bedding, garments, and sometimes even the bride's body the next morning to confirm the union was complete. Imagine waking up knowing your body is no longer your own. You are not asked how you feel. You are measured, inspected, and judged. What was meant to be sacred and intimate became a spectacle. It was stripped of dignity. A woman's worth was judged not by her character, but by the condition of the linens. For Catherine of Aragon, these rituals brought unbearable fear. Every wedding night carried the possibility of humiliation. Failure to provide proof of consummation did not merely lead to whispers. It could unravel a queen's entire future. It meant annulment, disgrace, or worse, accusations of treason. Catherine reportedly lived in terror of these inspections. Her mind was plagued by anxiety each time she was forced to share Henry's bed. Servants lingered outside the door. They strained to hear sounds that confirmed the king was fulfilling his duties. When the night was over, nothing was kept private. The humiliating details were recorded in court documents for the kingdom to know. Modern historians believe the psychological toll was devastating. Many queens showed symptoms that today would be recognized as severe anxiety disorders. To be a Queen of England was to live under constant scrutiny, and nowhere was that scrutiny more brutal than the king's bedchamber. You may think power protects you, but here, power is the very thing watching your every breath. Rule 2, no refusal allowed. If the first rule was humiliating, the second was terrifying. Once married to Henry VIII, a queen no longer had control over her own body. Refusal was not an option. If the king summoned his wife to his bed, she was required to obey without question. To hesitate, to resist, or even to show reluctance could be interpreted as treason, a crime punishable by death. You are not allowed to say no. You are not allowed to be afraid. This rule was absolute. A queen's health did not matter. Her emotions did not matter. Her sense of safety did not matter. Her only duty was obedience. You learn quickly that your body no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the crown. This rule became even more horrifying as Henry grew older. By his later years, the once athletic king had transformed into a man ravaged by obesity and disease. His body was plagued by festering ulcers that oozed pus. His legs were swollen and infected. His breath was foul enough to make courtiers recoil. Sharing his bed was not just unpleasant, it was unbearable. And yet, queens were forced to comply. They were expected to behave as though their king was still desirable. Refusal was impossible. Even hesitation invited suspicion. Henry kept spies watching his wives closely. If a queen took too long to answer his summons, if she appeared reluctant, if she failed to seem enthusiastic, her behavior was reported as evidence of possible betrayal. You begin to understand that even your expressions betray you. Your face must lie as carefully as your words. In Henry's paranoid mind, reluctance signaled disloyalty, perhaps even proof of adultery or witchcraft. For women like Anne of Cleves, the experience was especially horrifying. Though their marriage was brief and never fully consummated, she later confessed that Henry repulsed her. She described his diseased body and the offensive stench that clung to him. Yet even her position as queen offered no real protection. Submission was still expected. Her survival depended on pleasing a man whose body was decaying, a man whose temper could condemn her with a single word. By today's standards, Henry's treatment of his wives would be recognized as coercion, even abuse. But in Tudor England, it was simply called duty. The king, who executed men for so much as looking at him the wrong way, built a system where his wives were stripped of privacy, stripped of dignity, stripped of choice. They were not partners in marriage. They were prisoners in gilded cages, trapped in a bedchamber that was not a place of intimacy, but a chamber of horrors. The psychological torment Henry VIII inflicted on his wives went far beyond humiliation. The bedchamber was only the beginning of a nightmare that lasted an entire marriage. Under Henry VIII's rule, even the most private aspects of marriage became matters of state. And one of the most disturbing examples of this was what can only be called Rule 3. Bodies as evidence. You are no longer just a wife. Your body itself is a document waiting to be inspected. In Henry's court, intimacy was never only between husband and wife. It was a battlefield where politics, superstition, and paranoia collided. Henry's own sexual performance, or more often, his inability to perform, was twisted into proof of a queen's loyalty or disloyalty. The logic was staggering. If the king failed to consummate a marriage, it was never his fault. Instead, blame fell squarely on the queen. She could be accused of witchcraft, of carrying a curse, or of secretly plotting against the throne. You begin to understand that even the king's weakness can be turned into your crime. One of the clearest examples came with Anne of Cleves. Henry famously declared that he found her unattractive. He claimed, "I like her not." But he didn't stop there. He went so far as to argue that she had cursed his body, that she had somehow prevented him from performing his royal duty in bed. His refusal to consummate the marriage became evidence against her. Even though modern historians agree, the real problem lay with Henry himself. Later, when Henry's passion for Catherine Howard began to fade, he accused her of using witchcraft to manipulate his desire. Once again, insecurity turned into an accusation of sorcery. You are forced to see the pattern clearly. When desire disappears, suspicion takes its place. The most chilling aspect of this system was the role of royal physicians. After supposed intimate encounters, they were sometimes ordered to examine both king and queen. Their task was to determine fault when conception did not occur. These examinations were not medical in any modern sense. They were humiliating performance reviews, carried out under the authority of the crown. A queen's future, and sometimes her very life, hung in the balance. Today, medical experts point to Henry's obesity, his chronic infected leg ulcers, and likely diabetes as causes of severe erectile dysfunction. But in Tudor England, even suggesting the king had physical weakness was treason. His body could never be seen as flawed. You realize what this means. The truth must be buried, no matter the cost. Instead, his wives became scapegoats for what was essentially a medical disaster, and the examinations grew darker. Court physicians were tasked with documenting queens' bodies in graphic detail. They searched for marks, for scars, for natural variations, anything that could be twisted into proof of witchcraft or infidelity. In other words, Henry created a system where the natural human body became a political weapon. A queen lived in constant fear that a mole, a scar, or even a birthmark could one day be used as evidence of treason. What should have been moments of trust and intimacy became staged trials of loyalty, and with every inspection, women's lives hung quietly in the balance. Then came Rule 4, guards at the door. Privacy in Henry VIII's royal bedchamber was almost non-existent. What should have been the most personal space in the palace became something closer to a stage. Every act observed, recorded, judged. You are never truly alone. Even in the dark, you are being listened to. Royal guards were stationed directly outside the king's bedroom, not merely for protection, but to serve as witnesses. They were ordered to listen for sounds of consummation, to note how long the encounters lasted, to report unusual noises or suspicious conversations. These men were not bodyguards in any modern sense. They were auditors of intimacy. You begin to understand that silence itself can become evidence. And it didn't end there. Servants were woven into the spectacle. They were expected to inspect the bed sheets the next morning, to observe the queen's appearance, to report anything suggesting the marriage was not progressing as expected. Your body language is examined. Your fatigue is noted. Your dignity is dissected. Worse still, Henry reportedly allowed lookout points within his private chambers. Trusted men positioned to observe what unfolded inside. Surveillance turned intimacy into proof. This was not court gossip. These were deliberate measures, systems put in place to gather evidence that could later annul a marriage or condemn a queen. Physicians sometimes waited just beyond the door, ready to examine the king and his wife immediately afterward, prepared to pass judgment on bodies still warm from the encounter. You are no longer a woman in marriage. You are a subject in examination. The king's bedchamber was not a place of love. It became a medical theater, a courtroom, a prison. For women like Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, the knowledge of constant surveillance deepened the torment. To be watched in one's most vulnerable moments was unbearable. Intimacy was no longer about connection. It was no longer even about duty, it was about survival. There was Rule 5, pregnancy as duty. More than anything else, a queen existed in Henry VIII's bed to produce a male heir. Nothing mattered more than a son. Failure to conceive quickly could lead to disgrace, to annulment, or even death. You are not lying in bed hoping for love. You are lying there hoping your body will not betray you. Encounters in the royal bed were never moments of passion. They were high-stakes trials. Trials where a woman's body quietly decided her fate. The pressure was relentless. If a queen appeared to enjoy intimacy, she risked accusations of promiscuity, of having secret experience with other men. If she appeared hesitant or reluctant, she could be accused of not trying hard enough to conceive. You learn that even your emotions can be turned into evidence against you. Physicians tracked menstrual cycles with obsessive detail. They relied on outdated medieval theories built on fear rather than science. Urine samples were studied. Diets were restricted. Dreams were interpreted as supposed signs of pregnancy. Queens were subjected to humiliating examinations, their bodies reduced to charts and predictions. You are told when to eat, what to eat, and how much. Fertility herbs were forced upon them. Many of these mixtures were toxic. Some caused sickness, weakness, or long-term damage. Bizarre rituals were prescribed to improve conception. None of them guaranteed a child. Henry's control extended even to what entered their mouths. Meals were no longer about nourishment. They were experiments meant to transform a woman into a vessel for an heir. For Catherine of Aragon, who endured multiple miscarriages, the bedchamber was not a place of comfort. It was a place of dread. For Anne Boleyn, who failed to deliver a surviving son, biology became a weapon. Their suffering was not met with compassion. It was used against them. You begin to realize something terrifying. Your body failing is treated as disobedience. The inability to give Henry the son he demanded could turn the royal bedchamber into a courtroom of death, where failure in biology became grounds for execution. Henry VIII's bed was never truly a place of intimacy. It was a political arena, a medical theater, and often a chamber of horror. His insecurity, paranoia, and obsession with heirs created a system where privacy vanished. Women became scapegoats, and survival depended on something no one could control. Then came Rule 6, the danger of falling out of favor. Nothing was more terrifying for a queen of Henry VIII than the moment she sensed his affection fading. What once felt like protection could transform overnight into a death sentence. The security of royal marriage was an illusion, one that vanished the moment the king's desire cooled. You realize it before anyone says a word. The silences grow longer. The summons come less often. The very bed that once symbolized union and favor slowly became a place of dread. Not because intimacy ended, but because when it continued, it did so under a shadow. Fear and suspicion crept into moments that once promised safety. Anne Boleyn learned this truth in the cruelest way possible. She had once consumed Henry's every thought, his obsession, his defiance of Rome. And yet, in less than 3 years, she went from adored queen to condemned prisoner. The royal bedchamber played a central role in her destruction. Henry convinced himself that Anne was not merely his wife. She was, in his mind, a sorceress. He believed she used intimacy to cast spells over him, to bend his judgment, to plot against his throne. You begin to understand how madness dresses itself as logic. The most disturbing detail lies here. Even after Henry had resolved to have Anne executed, he continued to summon her to his bed, as if nothing had changed, as if affection still existed. The bedchamber became a lie, a performance staged to keep her unaware while the blade was being sharpened. Catherine Howard endured a nearly identical nightmare. She was called to Henry's chamber, expected to smile, expected to behave as a devoted wife, all while secret investigations into her past were already underway. Imagine being summoned by a man who kisses you at night and signs your death warrant by morning. The bedchamber itself became a weapon of psychological warfare. Henry devised twisted tests of loyalty. He demanded obedience to bizarre whims. Humiliating acts meant to prove devotion. You can never choose correctly. If his wives complied, Henry convinced himself they were manipulative witches seeking control. If they hesitated or resisted, he read it as proof of betrayal, disloyalty, guilt. It was a trap with no escape. Every reaction became evidence. Even private conversations spoken in moments of vulnerability were no longer safe. Words whispered in darkness were remembered, reframed, later repeated as accusations of treason. What we would now call pillow talk was weaponized, lifted from the bed and dragged into the courtroom, capable of deciding life or death. You realize too late that honesty is fatal. Modern experts on domestic abuse would immediately recognize the pattern. Intimacy stripped of safety, trust deliberately shattered, vulnerability exploited as control. Henry's bed was no longer a place of closeness. It became a chamber of surveillance, a place where affection concealed danger, and where private words could quietly tighten into a noose. And yet, as horrifying as the psychological torment was, the physical nightmare of sharing the king's bed in his final years may have been even worse. Fear attacked the mind, but the body suffered something far more immediate. Rule 7. The stench of disease. By the end of his life, Henry VIII's body was grotesquely ravaged by illness. Power no longer hid decay, it magnified it. His massive frame, weighing well over 400 pounds, was riddled with ulcers and open infections. His skin no longer healed, it broke down. You do not enter a bedchamber, you enter the smell before you see him. The stench of pus and rotting flesh filled the royal room, soaked into curtains, soaked into mattresses, soaked into memory. Bedding was frequently stained with bodily fluids. Blood, pus, serous discharge from wounds that refused to close. Servants scrubbed endlessly, yet no amount of washing could fully remove the odor. Queens were forced to lie beside a man whose body was literally decomposing while he still lived. Every breath became labor. Every moment, an act of endurance. Catherine Parr, his final wife, reportedly endured these horrors with forced composure. Her survival depended on restraint and silence. During intimate encounters, she pressed perfumed cloths tightly against her face, not out of courtesy, but to keep herself from vomiting. The smell of decaying flesh was so overpowering, it reportedly made her physically ill. His leg ulcers had worsened to the point that pieces of rotting tissue sometimes broke free. They fell onto the bedding, clung to skin. You are not allowed to recoil. You are not allowed to show disgust. Henry's obesity had become so extreme that servants used mechanical devices just to move his body. Pulleys, supports, hands trained not to flinch. Even positioning him for intimacy required assistance. Human strength was no longer enough. Worse still, exertion often caused his wounds to burst open. Pus and infected matter would spill suddenly, onto sheets, onto his wife. And still, his queens were expected to smile, to appear honored, to perform gratitude for his attention. You learn to control your face, because your expression may matter more than your survival. Modern medical experts believe Henry suffered from severe diabetes, chronic systemic infections, and likely gangrene in his final years. In many ways, he was already dying, yet his body continued to command obedience. His wives were forced to share his bed, endure the filth, breathe through the decay, and pretend desire where there was only revulsion, all in the name of loyalty to the crown, all in the name of duty. Henry's bed, in the end, was no place for love. It was a place where life decayed in plain view, and where survival depended on how much horror a woman could quietly bear. But perhaps the most terrifying rule of all was Rule 8, the fear of accusation. In the paranoid court of Henry VIII, truth mattered less than suspicion, and even rumors whispered about the bedchamber could be fatal. You don't need to be guilty, you only need to be talked about. Anne Boleyn's fall was built not on proof, but on gossip. Whispers that she had seduced men other than the king spread through the court like poison. What began as rumor quickly hardened into accusations of treason. Court musicians were arrested. They were tortured until they confessed to affairs that never happened. Their words were shaped by pain, not truth. Even Anne's own brother, George Boleyn, was executed. He was condemned on fabricated charges of incest. An accusation so extreme it shocked even contemporaries. Today, historians recognize these charges for what they were: carefully constructed lies, designed to justify a sentence Henry had already decided upon. You begin to understand that evidence is optional. Fear does the work on its own. Henry employed an extensive network of spies to watch his wives. The palace was never neutral ground. Servants who cleaned the royal bedchamber were interrogated, asked what they saw, what they heard, what they thought something might have meant. Ladies in waiting were ordered to report on their mistress's private words. Every sigh, every complaint, every joke spoken in exhaustion, even the most innocent remark could be twisted into betrayal. You learn to weigh every word, because silence can be suspicious too. Catherine Howard suffered the same fate. Her youthful relationships, formed long before her marriage, were dug up and reframed as crimes. Men who once courted her were imprisoned, tortured, pressured, until they delivered testimony the crown wanted to hear. Modern legal experts would recoil at such proceedings. Gossip treated as fact, hearsay elevated to truth, confessions extracted through pain. But in Tudor England, that was enough. Enough to sentence a queen to death. The result was a system built entirely on fear. Queens lived knowing that every glance could be misread, every word misremembered, every private moment stored for later use. The palace itself became a surveillance state, informants embedded everywhere, listening, reporting, waiting for the smallest mistake. Henry VIII's bedchamber was never a place of love. It was a chamber of torment. Marriage became a prolonged trial of survival. From wedding night inspections that reduced queens to physical evidence, to enduring forced intimacy with a body consumed by disease, to living under constant threat of gossip, turned into treason. These women were trapped in a system of psychological and physical torture, disguised as royal protocol. A king who claimed divine authority transformed privacy into exposure, intimacy into humiliation, and love into a potential death sentence. His queens lived in a world that demanded unimaginable strength, where survival required silence, restraint, and constant vigilance, and where even the royal bed itself was a place of horror. The candles are almost gone. Wax cools in shallow pools. Stone walls return to stillness. Somewhere far away, a door closes without a sound. The Tudor night fades the way it always did, not with peace, but with silence learning to behave. You don't need to stay there any longer. The weight of velvet and rules loosens. The air grows lighter. Time folds itself back where it belongs. Imagine the pages of an old book closing, not slammed, just gently pressed shut. The echo lingers for a moment, then it disappears. You are here again, in your own room, safe, untouched by whispers behind stone walls. If this quiet journey stayed with you, if the silence felt kind, you can leave a gentle mark behind. Like the video, share it if you wish. And join us by subscribing to my channel, Grimverse History. New nights are always waiting. New shadows, new stories told softly. For now, let rest take over. Let history sleep where it belongs. Goodbye, and we will meet again.